Hello and welcome. This is the adult Sunday school lesson for the First Baptist Church of Alabaster. This is the Explore the Bible series for Sunday, June 7th, 2020. The title of this week's lesson is Charted Waters. We'll be looking at Proverbs chapter 1 verses 17 through 19, verses 7 through 19. I would ask you, if you haven't already gotten your copy of the Word of God, if you would please do that and turn to Proverbs chapter 1, and we'll begin with the 7th verse. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head, and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Now, this lesson that we're studying this week is based, of course, in all the studies. It's the first in a lot of studies of the book, from the book of Proverbs. And this lesson emphasizes the relationship between wisdom and reverence for God. Then it focuses on the home where godly parents plant the seeds of wisdom in the minds of their children. The verses we are studying ends with a warning against bad relationships, which cause us to neglect the influence of wisdom and godly sense. I'm not sure if you heard the old story about the 6 blind men and the elephant. As 6 blind men were traveling down the road, an elephant blocked their path. They each tried to discover by touch what stood in front of them. One blind man touched the side of the elephant and said, it's a wall. Another man felt the elephant's leg and said, no, it's a tree. A third blind man touched the elephant's tail and said it was a rope. The fourth blind man touched the elephant's ear and said, it must be a big fan. The fifth blind man felt the tusk and said, no, it's a spear. The sixth man touched the trunk and said, well, it must be a snake. Well, all 6 blind men had a different perspective on what was in their path. But all were wrong because they didn't see the whole picture. Have you noticed how people sometimes approach life just like these 6 blind men and the elephant? Some people look at only one aspect of life. Some just concentrate on wisdom or knowledge, while others concentrate on pleasure. And then still others will concentrate on wealth. And they conclude by the sum of what they've experienced or what they desire as being the meaning of life, or having to do with the meaning of life. The sad part of it all is there are many these days who wish to leave God out of their lives and may even be offended when you attempt to explain that life is meaningless unless one knows God, the creator of life. Consider the meaning of wisdom, as in the Proverbs that we just read. Now, in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is more than an accumulation of knowledge. Biblical wisdom is concerned with the art of good living and the techniques that result in a well-lived life. An Old Testament professor, Marvin Tate, once said, "The wise man knows how to pilot himself through the confusion of the experiences of life. On a broad basis of experience, tradition, and piety, he seeks to master life and live successfully. Part of such mastery is the ability to make ethical decisions." Now, looking at verse 7 of Proverbs chapter 1, this verse has been called the motto of the book of Proverbs. The first line reads, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Now, how would you explain the meaning of that verse? Consider Psalm 14:1 in relation to this verse. "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they do abominable deeds, and there is none who does good." Take note that in the Proverbs, God is regarded as the ultimate source of all wisdom. In Proverbs chapter 8, verse 22, the writer tells us that God is the creator of wisdom and the beginning of all wisdom. Consider the phrase, fear of the Lord. These words point to us, to an attitude of reverence and awe toward God, rather than a cringing before him in terror. Consider these quotes. "The foundation of wisdom lies in knowing what to fear. Wisdom is fearing the right thing." And then, "Perhaps if we feared God more, we would fear everything else less." So the object of our fear, which is the Lord, is the key to finding the meaning of life. God is the source of truth, satisfaction, and fulfillment. The beginning of knowledge begins with reverencing God. He is the starting point, and those who refuse to reverence God are fools. The second part of verse 7 says, "Fools despise wisdom and instruction." The saying, "You can't tell him a thing," gives us insight into the kind of fool the writer has in mind. It seems to me that those who make up the majority are in search of a meaning of life, as long as the search does not include God and his word. Now, before we move on to verse 8, let me provide another good definition for the word wisdom. Now, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing that you don't put a tomato in a fruit salad. Now, let's move to verse 8. This places a great deal of emphasis on parental instruction. The home plays an important role in the education of the young. We all probably realize that. The church and the school bring knowledge and cultivate attitudes in children, but the home is of paramount importance in shaping their minds and character, especially in the young formative years, the preschool years, if you will. A father's instruction is important because he is the living link between the wisdom of yesterday and the child's world today. Fathers are in a unique position to see matters from the viewpoint of both a son and a father, since they have passed through the kinds of experiences that their sons must face. Proverbs also pays a high tribute to mothers as another source of wisdom. And in the same vein, a mother has also been a daughter and has unique experiences that are invaluable to her children. Now, moving on to Proverbs verses 10 through 19. These verses offer warnings against associating with robbers, with associating with murderers and evildoers, or stated another way, provide warnings against following after foolish people. Now, reviewing the news of the day gives us acts of appalling barbaric extremes. Murder by those who are responsible for protecting us. Arson, looting, theft, beatings from those who hide behind mass demonstrations. Brutal attacks on people who think differently than other particular people. There's sexual molestation. Human trafficking for the purpose of sex and slavery in these modern times. Now, the verses that we're studying, 10 through 19, reveals that the society of the era of Old Testament times, which these scriptures were written, are characterized by such crimes that I've just stated. Times don't seem to have changed a great deal and may have become even more extreme today than Old Testament times. The fact that these chaotic social conditions are referred to in the very first chapter of Proverbs shows how serious the problems were. So why isn't society different today than it was in the Old Testament times? Aren't we more sophisticated and aren't we more civilized today? Moving on, bands of robbers would prey on innocent people during that time. If you watch the news, it doesn't seem to have changed much. Robbing and even killing them were aggressive, and they were aggressive also in the recruiting of young men to help them. In other words, gang-type activity even in Old Testament times. Verse 11 tells us, "Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent." And this is, again, very similar to how gangs attract new members today through intimidation, threats, and physical personal harm, or harm to family members if they don't join. The seeker of wisdom is warned to avoid such evil conduct. Many times, depending on the neighborhood, it is difficult to avoid evildoers and those attempting to pull one into doing evil acts. Extreme peer pressure, if you will. They may think they don't have a choice but to do evil. Let us be bold and explain that Christ is the answer for the world today. It doesn't matter what sinful snare one is caught up in. Jesus is the answer. As we look at verses 18 and 19, they seem to bring in the point home. If you look at verse 11, if they say, "Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason," then you look at verse 18, "But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives." The evildoers or the gang members, if you will, are in reality ambushing themselves. The very reverse of their proposal in verse 11 has come about in verse 18 and 19. Now, as we go through the study of Proverbs, you may want to select your favorite verses, and you may want to put them to memory and hide them in your heart and hide them in your mind so that they may come to you at later times. Many of you may already have many Proverbs memorized. Allow me to leave you with a question. What in the world entices you to leave the path of righteousness? What entices you to not follow after Jesus as we should? And then how do you combat these temptations? Think about that. I hope this lesson has been helpful to you, I would encourage you to go back and read the Proverbs chapter 1 again and study them. And we'll be looking at more Proverbs in the Sundays ahead. But also allow me to leave you by repeating verse 7. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Only fools despise wisdom and discipline. My prayer for you is to continue experiencing the peace and hope that can only be found in Jesus Christ today and the days ahead.